good day and hello to everyone from whatever time zone you're joining us from. My name is Guy Caruso, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States. And on behalf of the International Social Role Valorization Association, I'm really delighted to welcome you to the third day and last session of the first virtual SRV conference. We're so pleased that you're joining us for this last session. We anticipate another stimulating session hearing from SRV implementers from around the world. This session will be 3 hours in duration, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the session's Master of Ceremonies, Jane Sherwin. Take it away, Jane.
Thank you, Guy. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's great that you can join us for another great session in this fabulous conference. There's been so much good information and good people. But before I go there, I would like to begin this session with a custom in Australia, and that is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. I am on the lands of the Jinnabara people. To the elders, past and present, of lands across Australia, I not only pay respect, but also I acknowledge the rampant and entrenched devaluation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since the 1700s. The resulting wounds which are carried and experienced still to this day, including relentless death-making, have been at a great cost to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I express sorrow and regret. Well, now to today. How about you get to meet each other? We are a bit limited in how that might happen, so I'm going to invite you to open chat. And can I ask you to say which country you're from and share 3 roles that you have? So if I was texting, I would say I'm from Australia, and 3 roles that I have are great aunt, reader, and member of a local activist group. You could choose relationship roles, doing roles, work roles, roles from other spheres of your life. So thanks to Thomas for the country and the roles. We see others naming their countries. We can already start to see some of the great things that roles and role language bring us. Like some of us might be already going, oh, I'm that role, or even the surprise, oh, Sharon, I didn't know you're a singer, for example. Fantastic. Yes, that's wonderful. And I hope you're getting a chance to have a look at the lists of everyone. Wonderful. What I'll ask you to do now, thank you, is to now text which devalued group are you most involved with or most concerned about? And of course, you don't have to limit it to one, but you need to think about time here too. Lots of relationship roles, lots of interests. Thanks. Bill and Sue is first off the rank. Yeah, Judith, same here. It's very interesting to see the range of, so someone mentioned homeless people as well, asylum seekers, a strong cohort involved in the lives of people with disabilities, but also older people. Thanks, Tony and Jane. Thanks, Katina. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for that. I'm hoping that that's giving you a picture of who else you're in the room with and we'll be sharing the day with as well. So Ray's mentioned children and youth in the care of the state. Yeah, thank you. People with a cold background. Yeah, good. All righty. So let me tell you about today. In a minute, I will introduce you to the speaker for the keynote speaker for this morning, Erica, who will then present her paper and take us through till 6:30 US your time. Oh, well, US Eastern Standard Time. At 6:30, we'll have a 15-minute break, and then there'll be 2 concurrent sessions. In terms of, they both look like fabulous sessions. So in terms of how you might decide which session you might be drawn to, one is, I think of it as a frontier life area. So to explain frontier life area, I can remember, I was going to say back in the olden days, but it's even present today, where it was thought that someone with a disability couldn't possibly live in their own home. Well, this presentation by Thomas Newville and Christopher King takes us into the sphere of post-secondary university. So very exciting. Or you might be drawn to listening to Greg McKay, who will explain the attempts to keep SRV alive by bringing learners and users of SRV together for joint learning, to support each other and to share the journey. So tough choice, but I'm hoping that, yes, you'll be where you need to be. Then please do come back here. It's important that we acknowledge and experience a close together so that we can properly bring this fabulous conference to a close. So we'll see you back here at 7:30. So I'm delighted to introduce Erica Baker Tinsley. Thanks, Erica, who is a professor and coordinator of the Developmental Services Worker Program at Loyalist College in Belleville, Ontario, Canada. Before beginning her teaching career, she worked as a family support coordinator, providing support to people with intellectual disabilities and their families. It was through that work that Erica was first introduced to SRV. So over the past 25 years, she's been involved in teaching SRV to service workers, administrators, families, and students at both high school and post-secondary schools levels. In addition to SRV, Erica is passionate about community development approaches that build strong communities where all members are welcomed and supported. Through her involvement in various non-profit organisations, Erica has engaged in advocacy work promoting inclusive education, food security, and affordable, secure housing. Erica has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Disability Studies from Ryerson University and a Master of Arts degree in Community Development from the University of Victoria. She is currently a board director of the Southern Ontario Training Group and a member of the Social Role Valorization Development, Training and Safeguarding Council. So can I ask you to join with me in welcoming Erica?
Thanks, Jane. So I'm quite honored to be providing the final keynote address of what has been a pretty amazing conference so far. And I'm particularly thrilled because I have an opportunity to talk about something that's really important to me, and that's teaching SRV to college students. Now, I was first introduced to SRV almost 25, well, probably 28 years ago now. And that's when I took a summer job. I was a college student, and I was hired by a family support organization, one that was deeply rooted in SRV. And because of that, all new staff had to have at least some initial SRV training. Now, the work I was hired to do at the time, my interpretation of that was to support this adorable little boy at summer camp. I thought I was just going to play with kids all summer. And I quickly learned that what I was actually doing was helping Ryan to fill the valued role of summer camper and friend. Now, a few years later, I transitioned into a family support coordinator role where I had the opportunity to help families learn about and implement SRV in the lives of their loved ones. And alongside that work, as Jane mentioned, I started to get involved with SRV training and teaching at SRV workshops and passing, and I've been doing that now for well over 20 years. Now, I've learned many things about teaching and implementing SRV in the past couple of decades through those experiences. But today, what I want to focus on is teaching SRV to students in my current role as the professor in the Developmental Services Worker program at Loyalist College. Now, just in case you're not familiar with that term, Developmental Services Worker is just, or DSW is the acronym, is just one of the terms that's used in Ontario and other parts of Canada to refer to people providing direct support to those with disabilities. And I'll explain a little bit more about that program in a minute. So for years at the college, I've been gathering comments and feedback from both teachers and students about SRV in our program. And the topic comes up at various points, directly and indirectly. But much of what I'm going to share today has come from a reflection paper that students are asked to write in their final semester. So they're asked to think about their experience in the program as a whole, so everything they've learned. They're asked to describe, some points of powerful learning, some content that had, an impact in one way or another, to describe some aha moments. Now, the teacher of that course started to share with me what the students were saying because a lot of SRV started to appear in those comments. And I teach the SRV course, so she thought I'd be interested in that. Now, at first, it was just lovely to read all of these. It was really nice to hear that students were enjoying their time learning about SRV and that it was powerful to them, especially because it's so important to me. Now, year after year, we just kept seeing the same thing. SRV appeared pretty consistently as one of the highlights within the program for many students. And I would even say a majority, at least to some degree. Now, I was probably a few years into this before I realized that there was something here. There's something really big going on here that would be important to capture. So I just started collecting all of these quotes. And I told students that I had no idea what I was going to do with them, but I wanted to keep them. And hoping that someday I'd find a meaningful way to share, what they've said. And today is that day. So I'm pretty excited about that. In fact, the name of this presentation, All Roads Lead Back to SRV, is one of those student quotes. And it's one that stuck with me over the years and influenced a lot of what I'm going to talk about. So today I'm going to share with you what the students have said about SRV and then provide some overall thoughts and reflections that I feel are not just applicable to a post-secondary environment. My hope is that what we've learned at the college could be transferred to other situations where training to human service workers occurs, especially when they're new to the work. Now, many of you might be familiar with one of the points that Dr. Wolfensberger makes about SRV training. So he said, SRV workshops try to help participants to understand the broad SRV approach and its high-level rationales and broad strategies, so the participants can extract on their own any number of lower-level specifics from this treasury of both knowledge and understanding. And that we do not want participants to function as human service assembly line workers or plumbers, but as human service philosophers, designers, and strategists. So SRV is not intended to be a low-level how-to kind of training. It's not a cookbook that gives us a simple recipe to follow. The goal isn't just to impart ideas for learners to implement in a very prescriptive way. That's quite different from a lot of other human service training that does just that. It teaches sort of A, B, and C, and that the learner should follow those instructions like a checklist. But SRV doesn't do that. It doesn't solve the problem that easily for the implementer. SRV provides a framework that aims to prepare implementers for the work that lies ahead of them in a culture where devalued people are at great disadvantage. Teaching and learning SRV is more of a formation process. So as Dr. Wolfensberger said, developing human service philosophers, designers, and strategists. Now, I can appreciate this idea of a formation process because I've experienced it firsthand. Many of you have as well. So for me, I was exposed to SRV through my employer, as I mentioned. and the material made a lot of sense to me. It fit well with what was expected of me and my work, and I was eager to do a good job, so I wanted to learn more. Now, I was lucky enough to have an executive director, Beth French, who many of you had the pleasure of knowing. Beth is a longtime trainer and mentor to many people. And Beth understood the idea of formation and was quite keen to initiate this incredible learning journey that I've been on. Now, one key part of that formation process was introducing me to others who study and teach SRV so that I could learn from them. So in short order, Beth introduced me to Dr. Wolfensberger. I had the great privilege of learning directly from Dr. Wolfensberger, which undoubtedly altered my life's path and played a significant part in my formation. Beth, Dr. Wolfensberger, Joe Massarelli, Peg Jenner, and many others, probably half of the people in this room, were very involved in an intentional formation process with the goal of not only ensuring that I had a proficient level of SRV knowledge, but also everything that I would need to be able to teach SRV to others and to use it meaningfully in service to devalued people. Now, this idea of formation is well known in the SRV training culture. And we've taken this idea of a formation process to heart in the DSW program. Our team of professors, which in addition to me includes Donna Vanderkloot and Doug Gunning, we aim to engage students in such a process. Now, I believe that what we teach and how we teach it does in fact foster the development of human service philosophers, not just simply people who are competent in providing all kinds of elements of practical support. Now, that's not necessarily the goal of programs like ours, or frankly, what students think they're signing up for. This type of program is intended to provide a credential, a certification, so to speak, that confirms that students have demonstrated the skills required to work with people with intellectual disabilities. And we do that. But at the same time, we're also trying to shape students into the kind of service workers who will stand with devalued people. We want students to think deeply about issues, to analyze what is happening, to be strategic in their actions, and so on. So in other words, we want to form our students to help them craft a role that is coherent with their values and worldview. Now, SRV is not the only content in our program that aids in this formation process, but it's a critical one. Now, just before I share what we've learned on this journey within our program, I think it would be helpful to provide a bit of context about our program so that it makes a little bit more sense what the students had to say. So I will come back to the student comments, so just bear with me. So the DSW program is a 2-year diploma program that trains students to support children and adults with developmental disabilities. There are 12 colleges in Ontario that offer the DSW program, and graduates will ultimately work in a variety of settings, but most commonly residential and day services, but also within the education system, so working as an educational assistant in a classroom. And then some graduates also go on to work with families. The DSW program, like most in the college, Ontario college system, is designed to give students the practical knowledge and the skills that they would need to gain employment in a specific field. And like most diploma programs, we must meet vocational standards, so learning outcomes that are set out by a governing provincial body. So I just want to show you the standards of our program. So I'll just summarize these for you. So basically, graduates of a DSW program are trained to provide person-directed supports and services for people with developmental disabilities in a manner that is safe, respectful, and that fosters self-determination, empowerment, and community inclusion. Now, these are quite broad. Now, it's the broadness of these standards that allows individual colleges to design their own curriculum, as long as it maps back clearly to those outcomes. And it's this broadness that allows us to not only teach SRV, but to use it as one of our guiding frameworks. So at Loyalist, SRV is one of the ways that we teach students to do what's prescribed in those vocational outcomes. It helps us frame and to make more concrete what are very abstract ideas like choice and empowerment and inclusion. It also provides a how. So for example, we promote personal social integration and valued societal participation for people. We use valued social roles as a means, the vehicle to help people achieve the very lofty ideas set out in those standards. Now, I should mention that SRV is not taught in all DSW programs in Ontario. Of the 12 programs that I mentioned, only 2 teach SRV in any depth, and Loyalist would be one of them. There's a third college that teaches some SRV content, but not the full theory. And of the remaining colleges, if SRV comes up at all, it's probably mentioned in relation to Dr. Wolfensberger's impact on the field, but the content itself isn't taught. Now, like any good SRV conversation, we need to know a little bit about the people. So I'd like to tell you about our students. Here we go. So DSW students are quite diverse. They range in age from 18, so just leaving high school, to people maybe in their 40s or 50s who are looking for a second career. We have more female than male students, which probably doesn't surprise anyone. We have a mix of domestic and international students. Our international students are predominantly from India, but we also have students from Nepal, the Philippines, Nigeria, Ghana, just to name a few. The students also range in experience. So we have some students who might never have even met somebody with a disability before. Others might have a little bit of experience through some volunteer work or, a part-time job, or maybe through their own schooling. And we also have some students who have much more experience. They've either worked in the field for a little while or have some connection to disability in their personal life. So it's not uncommon for us to have family members as students. So maybe the parents of people with disabilities or siblings. Now, I want to take just a couple minutes to explain on a very practical level how SRV is taught and applied in the DSW program. So one of the first required courses that students must take it's called Valued Social Roles. It's what's highlighted here in red. So this is a 56-hour course that spans 14 weeks, so the full semester, and it teaches the SRV theory. So students learn the same SRV 10 content that is typically taught in a 4-day leadership level SRV workshop. In addition to lectures and that the students listen to, they participate in all kinds of activities that help them work with the material. And then ultimately they're evaluated and they have multiple assignments and tests that they need to complete. Now, unlike a standard workshop, the students have to pass this course. Now, the outcomes of this course really involve understanding devaluation, learning about SRV themes, and then using SRV in a systematic way to help devalued people attain valued social roles. Students are expected to comprehend the material on a level that will allow for implementation. And ultimately, they leave this course with enough knowledge and skills to be successful in related other courses and other semesters, and on their practicum, or we call it a field placement, which just means that they have some learning in an unpaid work role in a service setting. Now, in addition to that primary SRV course, SRV content is used directly and indirectly in various other courses. So here I'm just pointing out, so this is our program of study, and then the courses that are highlighted in yellow have a direct SRV connection. So either the concepts are used to support learning or assessment. So just as an example, in semester 2, person-centered planning, students create a plan that could help a person gain valued roles that hopefully would lead to the good things of life. Or in semester 3, inclusive practice, students are taught strategies that would be needed to help people actually fill those roles: student, employee, athlete, friend. Now, the courses that are highlighted in blue use some SRV content or has some connection, but it's more indirect. So in semester 3, disability and ethical issues, students develop critical thinking skills and tools to analyze various service practices or other realities that might fall in the realm of death making. So things like restraint use on people with intellectual disabilities, or physician-assisted suicide laws. Or in semester 4, in supporting families, students would learn a little bit about, how maybe to support a family to learn SRV, or how applying SRV in a family context might be different from a more traditional service. Now, field placement is a key component of learning and applying SRV concepts, so they're highlighted here in yellow as well. Now, all students must complete 3 placements where they work directly with people with disabilities in real services. So a student might be on a placement in a classroom or in a group living residential type setting. Placements are 2 to 3 days a week, depending on the placement, for an average of 6 hours a day. And then placements range from 10 to 12 weeks in length. Now, by the time students graduate, they will have demonstrated outcomes in different types of settings with both children and adults with developmental disabilities. And then the level of their application increases through each placement. Now, while they're on placement, they have around 30 elements of performance, so different skills they have to demonstrate. But these are just some examples of some that relate specifically to SRV. So things like identifying wounding and the responses of the people that they're supporting, identifying valued and devalued roles. They need to work toward enhancing the image of the people that they support, and then developing ways to assist people to fill roles, and so on. Now, I want to be really clear that I didn't bring SRV to Loyalist. The Loyalist DSW program has existed since the early 70s, and so taught Wolfensberger's work long before I arrived in 2009, including teaching normalization in the early days. Now, I don't know who exactly started teaching Wolfensberger's material at Loyalist, but Jane Barkin, who started teaching at Loyalist in the early 90s and has since retired, Jane is one of the people who ensured SRV was not only taught, but embedded in that program. In fact, that SRV teaching was happening in the DSW program at Loyalist is what lured me to the college in the first place. And I'm very grateful for the legacy that I've inherited. So now I would like to move on, now that we have a bit of understanding about the program, to look at what I'm going to call lessons. So what I've done is I've taken all of these quotes that students have provided, and I've organized them into themes, like I said, lessons. Now, I would love to be able to share every single comment that the students have given. I mean, they're very informative, but that certainly would take me over my time. So what I'm going to do instead is within each lesson area, I'll provide a few quotes just so that you have a bit of flavor of what they said. Okay, my first lesson. Firstest with the mostest. So as many of you will remember from your SRV training, when learning about how social judgments are made, Dr. Wolfensberger taught us that what gets put into the mind firstest with the mostest is apt to stick. Now, I think we can apply the same principle to what we teach people entering human services. So all educational programs, regardless of their type, have to consider the order in which things are taught. And there's all kinds of rationales for how that might get done. But, foundational material is taught first. Certain topics have to be taught before more complex ones are introduced, and so on. But I often wonder how much consideration is given to what we're putting into the minds of students. So not the knowledge itself, but the impression, the perspective. What image messages are being sent? What are those early messages that students are receiving? Now, when I look at a lot of programs like ours, many of those early courses are devoted to technical kinds of things, describing human development or teaching clinical information about disability. Depending on the type of program, students might learn personal care techniques or might be exposed to content about behavior management, those types of topics. Now, technical knowledge can be important and may very well have a place For example, students need to understand how intellectual impairment can impact how somebody learns. But if much of that early learning is clinical or technical in nature, what are students learning about people with disabilities? What is getting put into their minds? Are we unintentionally confirming negative stereotypes about disability? That people are sick or dangerous, or that this work is custodial in nature? Now, contrast that with how an early introduction to SRV might shape students. For example, how does learning about devaluation and wounding impact the mind of a new learner? Now, in our program, even before classes begin, students get their very first taste of SRV content. It's in their program orientation, so on day 1. Now, this happens in how we talk about the program and the work that they'll be trained to do. We describe the work as supporting people with disabilities to have valued roles that will enable them to contribute and participate in their community. Students get to see within the first half hour a video depicting a person with a disability being supported to hold various valued roles. They see that person receiving help to do all sorts of very typical everyday things, the types of things that the students would do themselves. And for some, this might be the very first exposure to what support to people with disabilities looks like. So we ask students to keep that image in their mind. This is what this work can look like. We plant the seed and we set that expectation early. Now, in terms of academics, SRV is the first framework that students learn, and in a very intensive way. Now, it's taught alongside those other technical courses, like I mentioned, and when we do that so that there's some counterbalance to those clinical messages. Now, valued social roles, as I mentioned, is 56 hours. Now, that's one of the longest courses in our program. So it's substantial in terms of the length and the amount of content that's taught. Now, it is definitely not an easy course for most to navigate, and especially so that early in their education. Most enter our program with just a general notion that they want to help people, but not much more than that. So this course can be a real shock to the system, certainly not what they expected coming into the program. It has a bit of a reputation for being the hardest course, not just because of the academic rigor, but also because it challenges the students' mindsets and ideals and understanding of people and how they look at the world. Within the first couple of weeks of entering the program, students begin to learn about devaluation and its wounding consequences. Then that becomes the lens that they use to understand the material that they're learning in other classes. So their knowledge of devaluation gives them a way to understand, the history of developmental services like institutionalization. The consciousness raising that occurs and so early in their education is an important element of their development. Consciousness about the existence of devaluation, consciousness of wounding, consciousness about human nature, and maybe the most powerful and painful is the awareness that they are likely, regardless of their intention, to wound others in the very role that they're training for and within the system that will provide for their own livelihood. So I'll share a few comments. So I started to see things I'd never seen before, that have always been there, but never touched my life, so weren't real. Things like segregation. How could I have missed all the blatantly obvious ways society separates the devalued from the valued? Learning about devaluation and wounding has made me aware of the plight of devalued people, and I will use this new understanding to guide how I provide support in the future. The SRV course had a huge impact on the rest of my learning in the program. SRV is the foundation for our learning. Every single course, particularly in the last 3 semesters, is based on an assumption that we truly believe what was taught in that course, and that we will combine it with all the other knowledge gained while supporting people. So they learn SRV early and with intensity, and that enhances the chances that it will stick, right? So the firstest with the mostest. Now, my second lesson, doing versus talking about doing. Now, I'm borrowing this phrase from Michael Kendrick, and he used it when he was speaking to our students a few years ago. Now, he wasn't talking specifically about SRV. He was talking about leadership in the field. But I think the phrase is well suited for this discussion. Now, as I've described, students learn SRV in semester 1 and are asked to apply the concepts at the same time. And this happens through discussions and activities and assignments and so on. Now, at this point, we really are only talking about doing. However, they have opportunities to think about how they could use these ideas. So, for example, they might practice using culture-divide analogs to help them think about what would be typical and valued for the people that they're going to support. Or we analyze pictures and other examples to identify image issues and then try and think about how we could enhance those images. But once they move into semester 2, there's a lot more doing. They are expected to apply and implement in a more concrete sense. You know, some courses require very explicit application of SRV ideas. As I mentioned, the roles course, the planning course, where students develop a roles-based plan. Another example is that students have to develop a teaching plan for how they would support a person to learn the competencies required for a specific role. But then even more intensive is application on placement, or that practicum that I described. So placement is all about doing. Students have opportunities early in semester 2 to use these ideas in real settings in support to real people. And as I mentioned, that is everything from describing the wounds and the responses of the people that they're meeting, to developing and implementing ideas that will move people closer to attainment of valued social roles. Now, I believe this is a really important difference from how many people learn SRV. They attend a workshop and they hear the content. Now, with some exceptions, much of the training is designed in a way that participants don't have the opportunity in the moment to interact with the material. There is a hope and maybe an assumption that there will be an opportunity for them to implement when they go back to their workplace or their family. And if that occurs, it may end up being somewhat of a self-guided endeavor unless SRV is deeply embedded in that organization and its service practices, which, you know, as we know, unfortunately, is not the case for many. Now, in our case, students have to use the material. They have to apply it. They have to implement. Frankly, they can't pass certain courses without it, which means they couldn't ultimately graduate. Now, we've all been taught that SRV doesn't should learners. SRV can tell us what we could do, what is likely to happen if something is done or not done, and so on. But SRV theory itself cannot tell people that they should do something. But as we know, teachers tend to teach SRV with a bias that it would be implemented. But in our program, we get to should people. Now, I appreciate that that doesn't sound very well, that doesn't sound very good, but the point is that we know that people understand the material better when they have opportunities to use it, to see its application, right, in various ways, in various types of settings, and in support to different people. That's exactly why passing is such a powerful and effective learning experience. So in the DSW program, implementation is not abstract. We don't just talk about how to do it, and it's very concrete. Students receive guidance from teachers who all have SRV training to implement SRV in a specific placement setting and with the specific people that they are serving. And then they have 3 different opportunities to do this. So I'd like to share some student comments about SRV application, so about doing. So after my second day on placement, I was in tears. People live in places that aren't homey, that have nursing stations and locked doors. They eat food they don't like, have rude staff. It is one thing to learn about it, but another to experience it. I have a much deeper understanding of the process of devaluation and how this has affected my aunt. I was able to relate my personal experience to different concepts presented in SRV and use it to improve my aunt's life and the lives of the people I support on placement. SRV was instrumental in helping me develop strategies to prevent and remediate wounding in the field. If SRV was not taught, students would attend placement and enter the field repeating the same mistakes of the past without even realizing it. Now, I have no doubt that having opportunities to actually apply and attempt to implement SRV greatly enhances their overall comprehension of the theory. But as you can imagine, there are all kinds of limitations that would inhibit full, coherent SRV application in a practicum situation like this. But as we've been taught in SRV, even a little SRV, even imperfectly done and implemented, can have positive results. So in addition to enhancing student learning, having opportunities for doing while on placement has had positive impacts on the people whose students have had the opportunity to meet. And we've seen the outcomes of even a little SRV. So SRV is what encouraged a student to help a person supported to try real golf for the first time, not just playing Nintendo Wii golf. It helped a student understand the importance of supporting a person to join an art class instead of just painting alone at home. It's what motivated a student to teach a child to use a communication device more effectively so that he could participate in a meaningful way in the classroom. It's what helped a student to see the value of organizing Sunday dinners so that the person supported could spend time with their family. Now, honestly, sharing examples of what students have done while on placement using SRV, that could be a whole other presentation. So I think I better move on to my next lesson, or I'm definitely going to go over my time. So my third lesson is real people, real stories. So one very loud and consistent message that we've received from students is that hearing about and from real people who have used SRV or been impacted by its use is extremely powerful. We try as much as possible to share stories of SRV implementation from our own work and our own lives, but more importantly, provide opportunities for students to hear from others who are doing the work. They've heard from SRV trainers, from SRV implementers, both in paid and unpaid roles like family members, and from people with disabilities themselves. Now, sometimes this happens through videos that we share or through required readings, books, articles. Now, we don't use many traditional textbooks in our program. Of course, the SRV monograph is one of our required textbooks. But we also use many of the SRV journal articles. Some, if I can brag just for a moment, have even been written by DSW grads. Now, in these articles, in these articles, students get to read about people's use of CVA and image enhancement and interpersonal identification and so on. Now, we also try and expose students to written material by materials that are written by people with disabilities who have been changed in some way by valued social roles. So they read Never Going Back, which is a book written by Gordon Ferguson. Students read about his life in the institution and how his world changed once he was released and moved into a real home in the community. They read about Gord holding roles of husband and advocate, employee and board member, and so many more. And in the picture, you can see Gord came to speak to the students, and he signed their book, which they were quite happy about. Students also read about the struggles and the successes of a family helping their daughter to have the good things of life in a book called Rachel's Story. In this book, students learn about Rachel's valued roles of student and friend and beloved daughter. Another book that many students have commented on, but that is not SRV specifically, but certainly related, is Dr. Wolfensberger's book about protecting patients in the hospital. This book helps students to see how devaluation impacts people in the medical system and offers all kinds of helpful strategies to keep people safe. So here's one comment about that book. I know people were more vulnerable to bad things happening. I learned that in the SRV course. But it really surprised me how much people with disabilities are at risk in the hospital. This whole book gives me a knot in my stomach. I will think about it every time I go into a hospital. This book is important to read, and it will be something I remember for a long time. Now, we've also been lucky enough to have many guests speak directly to our students. Some of you might recognize this man. So in the early days at Loyalist, I was able to take students on, we call them little field trips, because Syracuse is relatively close to Belleville. So we would go down and listen to Dr. Wolfensberger speak. And in the picture, what you're seeing is Dr. Wolfensberger invited some of the students to his home for dinner after one of the lectures. They were equally as thrilled and terrified at the idea of having dinner with Dr. Wolfensberger. Certainly memorable. Now, students have also heard from many of the same people that we've heard from or about this week. So students have learned very powerful lessons from Beth French, Tom Duty, Michael Kendrick, Betsy Newville, Joe Massarelli, Janet Cleese, that's just to name a few. They also speak about the incredible learning that happened from hearing directly from people with disabilities. So hearing Paul Young speak made me think deeply about all the unfound limitations we place on people just because they have a disability. By observing real people living with disabilities achieve the good things of life with help, I thought, aha, I can help someone do that too. We've heard so many stories that illustrate the true definition of integration. It defines the way I do things now in supporting people. One student commented on how much he learned from a support worker who was sharing his experiences. He said he tries his hardest to think outside the box, to help the person he supports be in many activities, ones most people think he wouldn't be able to do. Before I started the program, I thought that having segregated sports was okay, in fact, a good thing. Now that I know the true meaning of integration, I will go above and beyond to help the person I'm supporting to get where they want to be and do the meaningful things they want to do in their community, with family and friends. This conference and all the previous SRV conferences are a good illustration of my point. We are all very deeply impacted by real stories. We learn from the experience of others. And for our students, it is critical that they see that SRV can be implemented and can have a big impact, especially since they might not see that in action in many services. My fourth lesson, SRV alone isn't enough. Now, an overarching goal of our program is to provide students with the knowledge and the skills that they need, not only to provide quality service, so that is service that ultimately enhances the lives of devalued people, but also to prepare them with what they need to be able to provide that level of support in a complex and sometimes very incoherent service world. And SRV knowledge might not be enough. Now, we've tried to think about what Susan Thomas described in a 2014 SRV journal article. The competency in SRV, that is knowledge of SRV and all its nuances and complexities, is necessary, but not sufficient for either the dissemination or implementation of SRV. Now, in that article, she lists additional competencies, and Susan includes things like knowledge of attitude change and change agentry, clinical knowledge about certain devalued conditions, and good judgment, or good sense, judgment, foresight, and wisdom. Now, I certainly cannot claim that we equip students with all of those things, but I think we try. Now, we have various courses that provide clinical knowledge, and frankly, that's something that most human services tend to do well. We also teach critical thinking skills. We help students to develop strategies and hopefully a passion for tackling ethical issues. We try to instill leadership qualities and teach effective change strategies that will help them do good things in the field. In their final semester, we ask students to develop some strategies that they might be able to use to help prevent them from getting sucked into bad practice. Now, all of this is outside the direct SRV course material. We also encourage students to expand their learning outside of our program, right? We can't possibly give them everything that they would need. Now, after exposure to SRV in the program, some students want to learn more and they go on to other trainings and workshops. Some go on to the 4-day SRV workshop to hear the material again and in a different format. We've had a few grads who've attended the 4-day workshop 2 or 3 times, right? Even after graduating our program. We've had several students attend passing. We've had others go on to shorter 1 or 2-day events that are related to or extensions of SRV in some way. So like it has done for many of us, an introduction to SRV sparks the need for more. Now, students credit SRV for putting them on a path to actually being able to improve people's life circumstance. And SRV seems to be a prerequisite, so to speak, that enabled them to absorb more complex notions like attitude change and leadership. It seems that additional content that I mentioned may not have had the same impact had they not had that previous SRV learning. So here are a few comments that reflect the overall impact of SRV. SRV was a heavy but important, even crucial part of becoming the kind of developmental services worker I want to be. The consciousness raising that SRV provides is imperative for society to change, and we desperately need that change. It allowed me to better understand the problems that people with intellectual disabilities face, but also how the agencies responsible for their care fall short. I'm so grateful for what I've learned. It's just my opinion, but if SRV can change me, imagine if all human service workers were trained in it. So, when they graduate, are students really ready to face everything that comes along with aligning themselves with devalued people? I don't know. But what I do know is that they certainly believe that they are. So years on, I am fully engaged in a helping career that serves the most vulnerable people in my city and beyond. What has remained abundantly clear is how social roles really do shape who we become and how others perceive us. And for those with disabilities, visible or otherwise, being cast into valuable ones can literally save their lives. Beyond the classroom, I am a daily witness of the power of enhancing image, altering environments, and how positive regard in all truly goes a long way to supporting humans to live their best lives. We will find ourselves swimming upstream and battling the currents of harmful mindsets. I envision Dr. Wolfensberger teaching his early students the concepts of SRV and then sending them out in the world. There is still great hope that the fruit of his life's work lives on, changing one life at a time. Now, from my experience teaching SRV both inside and outside the college setting, I echo what others have said, that knowledge of SRV theory alone isn't going to be enough. I believe our typical SRV training and mentoring culture does its best to provide this additional learning. But I also think our experience at the college reaffirms the need to encourage and support the teaching of SRV in academic environments, wherever possible, especially since these kinds of other environments, like an academic environment, has the opportunity to develop these broader competencies, right? It's an easier setting to be able to do that. Now I'd like to move on to my final lesson, and this is one that I feel is an essential part of the formation process for students. So it's about provoking change. Like often happens with any SRV training, learners begin to reflect on their own beliefs, perspectives, mindsets. It sends many of us on a soul-searching mission. SRV raises deep values questions that it cannot answer. And frankly, I haven't come across many other, types of human service training that provokes that level of deep reflection. And it's that reflection that serves as a catalyst for change. So change in the person and a change in their actions. Now, the intentional and guided exploration of one's values and beliefs has proven to be an invaluable part of the student's development generally. But for many, it's what sets them on the path to becoming human service philosophers. Now, almost everyone who enters our program arrives not only with the desire to help people, but I would say also a fairly naive view of themselves. Most have never needed to or been asked to look at themselves, right? To reflect. What do they believe? Why do they believe those things? Where did those beliefs and values come from? Or even why do they want a career helping people in the first place? Now, it's quite jarring for many to think about their own potential devaluations of others. Many believe, at least for a short while, that they don't devalue people, and that they certainly don't devalue people with disabilities. Within the first month of the program, students are confronted with all sorts of profound notions, ideas that they've never considered, situations that they didn't even know existed, or certainly hadn't thought of before. And they're guided to a realization that they too, like everyone, play a role in devaluation. Now, I commonly hear in somewhat of a joking way that this course has ruined everything for me. That's because it lifts the veil, so to speak, and some students fully expect never being able to unsee or unknow what the course has uncovered. Now, exposure to SRV seems to change the student's perspective of the work itself. It helps them identify with the people that they will support and understand that there is probably a bigger purpose in their role. I believe it serves as a motivator to be gooder, as Susan Thomas would say, quoting Dr. Wolfensberger's Moral Coherency Workshop. Now, even though the result of all this self-reflection is productive and helpful, students acknowledge that the journey is challenging. I cannot begin to convey the emotional roller coaster and various dark alleys my emotions took me on. SRV humbled me and challenged even my core beliefs. It made me do a serious internal inventory. One of the biggest aha moments came from the realization and acknowledgement of my own devaluations. I always knew that I had different beliefs and values than most about people with disabilities, but I didn't have the words to describe those feelings and beliefs before SRV. SRV completely changed the way I thought about everything. Now, one student even commented on the foreword that's written in the SRV monograph by Zena Lutfia and Thomas Newville. And she said that it gave an open and honest foreshadowing of her overall journey through the DSW program, from the desire to change the world to coming to grips with the real limits of doing so. The foreword encompasses the journey from semester 1 to semester 4. Now, this values exploration can be even more challenging for international students who originate from countries where disability is hidden away, seen as a curse, a shame, or a sin to the family. Last semester, one of our students, he was telling me about some of the beliefs and the mindsets that exist about people with disabilities in his home country in Africa. And admittedly, he carried those beliefs with him into the program. But he said, SRV changed my perspective of people with disabilities, my perception of people with disabilities from negative to positive. And the SRV course ignited a passion in me to support people with disabilities to the best of my abilities, while also ensuring that every decision I make in the field follows SRV themes. Now, even though uncomfortable and painful at points, the students' comments illustrate that thinking deeply about one's beliefs and values and mindsets is a worthwhile endeavor, and one that's quite necessary. It's something that might not have occurred without exposure to social role valorization, and it's what has provoked the call to action that many of them experience. So now I'd like to just make a few concluding comments. So I feel that what we've done within the DSW program has been beneficial, and overwhelmingly students are grateful for their SRV learning. But what we do within the program isn't without its share of challenges and limitations. So we don't have easy access to services in our area that are deeply enrooted in SRV. So students don't necessarily get to see firsthand others putting the ideas into actions on a systematic basis. Even though we have great support for our students with our local partners, we do get a bit of pushback from organizations that don't see the value in teaching students certain things like wounding or teaching them to be critical thinkers. We live in an area that had a large institution for people with disabilities. Some of the mindsets that supported that type of medical and custodial care still linger in our area. Some agency staff who supervise students while they're on their placements are resistant, very resistant to students spending their time supporting people to be involved in the community. You know, we've heard things like, you know, it was better in the olden days when we didn't have to do this inclusion stuff. Also, for much of what I've described to work well for effective SRV dissemination, it requires faculty to have a strong SRV background. Now, that greatly limits the pool of people that we have to draw from, especially in our part-time staff who, just for practical reasons, need to live locally. As I mentioned, we have a very culturally diverse group of students. That means we have a wide range of life experiences and values to contend with. This can make teaching some content, a bit more complicated. It can make coming to agreement on what is valued and devalued more challenging. It can impact how a student might determine, what quality looks like in a service. For example, I've heard a number of times from students that in their home country, people with disabilities are chained to walls. I saw pictures of that in one of the sessions yesterday. So it can be a bit hard for them to acknowledge that some of the practices that they see maybe in a local group home are harmful, right? They might seem quite minor in comparison. Also, for some students, the material itself is really hard to understand. And at the end of the day, we're an academic program that assesses students. They receive a credential and that must be earned. The reality, unfortunately, is that if a student's going to fail a course in our program, it's going to be the SRV course. But even if students pass, that doesn't necessarily mean they believe in the ideas or their validity, or that they're moved to serve people accordingly. There's always that potential anytime something is mandated. Students may only end up using SRV content throughout the program in the most minimal way, simply because they have to and simply to pass. Now, these last 2 points that I made make me think of a video clip that we show students from the History of Human Services series with Dr. Wolfensberger and Susan Thomas. And in that clip, Dr. Wolfensberger describes the 4 ways people commonly responded when they first heard normalization taught. So he said that one response was just non-comprehension. It was just beyond them. A second was intensely hostile rejection. A third was polite rejection of what they deemed to be utopian. And then the final was an aha response. as if to something that should have been thought of all along. Now, I certainly appreciate that there are differences between early teaching of normalization and teaching SRV in a college program, but some of the reactions are quite similar. So there are certainly some students who just can't comprehend the theory. It's too complicated and too involved for them to manage academically. Now, I can honestly say that I haven't directly experienced hostile rejection. I can only really even think of a couple instances where people disagreed with a particular piece of content. Now, that tended to be because of a misunderstanding or misinterpretation, or just because they were deeply committed to whatever service practice that they had been providing, and they weren't open to other ways of looking at things. But even then, it wouldn't rise to the level of hostility. Now, I also have the benefit of an academic context, which I'm assuming would curb a bit of that fiery reaction. Now, there is some polite rejection. Students who have no particular issue with the material itself, but it's apparent that they're applying it for the sake of a pass, or that they prefer a different way of supporting people. But I think what my collection over the years has illustrated is that we have an awful lot of aha moments. Student after student, moved by the material, shaped by it, and who feel a call to action. Now, I've never really calculated the numbers, but through our various program formats, because we have a distance and an apprenticeship program as well, we likely graduate somewhere between 40 and 50 students a year. So all of those students would have SRV training, the type that I've described. So just during my time alone, that means we've exposed well over 500 future human service workers to SRV. So if nothing else, we at least have numbers on our side. That's 500 people who may never have heard about SRV had they not attended our program. Now, some of those students left the program with the information, the technical knowledge, and the credential that they came for. But others left with a lot more. They left changed. Now, I'd like to end with a few final quotes, and these are ones that I found particularly powerful and that continue to motivate me in this endeavor to create human service philosophers, designers, and strategists. As I look at the notes that I've made in the margins of my SRV book, I'm reminded of the aha moments that provoked a resurgence of who I am, where I've come from, where I'm headed, and ultimately my core family values. It is not simply a theory to be memorized or contemplated. SRV offered me and others a lens through which to view the world, not always as it is, but how it could be, and how to make it so. And finally, it's hard to pinpoint my aha moments. All my learning in this program seems to be derivatives of SRV theory. When I began viewing the courses, I thought I would find some exceptions to that statement, but that is not the case. All roads lead back to SRV. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Gosh, what a presentation, just full of learning and insight from your own journey, from the journey of your students. I just loved hearing some of those quotes. I imagine that many of us as students ourselves, although in a different sort of way and format and journey, we're able to really identify with the sense of hope and turmoil and challenge and struggle and humility and just sort of all of those feelings that Wolf's work and these ideas of devaluation and helping to open up the world to people in a different kind of way, just all that's brought into all of our lives and our development and growth. Thank you for that, and to your students as well for sharing their experiences with us. I imagine that there are lots of questions and comments to be brought forward. So we can take a moment and sort of gather our thoughts around those questions and comments. And you can raise your hand, use the functions, the Zoom function to raise your hand and ask a question. You can also use the chat. The chat is open, so open that all up to you all now to respond. Fabulous. Thank you, Erica from Pat Cunningham. A question from Tom Malcolmson. Erica, have you ever thought of having students do a passing?
So students have attended passing. Some students have. Students want us to do they always ask why we don't have passing as one of the required courses. And I've said, because I need to keep our placement sites. That's why we don't do that. But there's a course in semester 4 called Leadership and Change that we use some passing ratings and do some things with passing there. But it's only been a few that's gone on to do passing.
Gareth Lloyd asks, he says, great presentation, Erica. Would you say the response to SRV is different from students when compared to those working in the field who take the course?
Well, I think so I would say no. I think people tend to have the same reaction. It might take them a little bit longer, right? So I have lots of students in the beginning who, they'll say things like, I've taken the program because when I'm finished, I want to, create a school for children with autism, or I want to open my own group home or something like that. And I just say, okay, we'll talk about that in a couple of years. And so I find that some of the people that have some work experience already, they tend to come around, I guess. I'm not sure that's the best way to say it, but they seem to be accepting of the material, even if they're a little bit hesitant at the beginning.
Thomas Newville asks, he says, a great coherent approach. Have you experienced pushback from other professors or curricular bodies?
So not from other professors. Now, SRV training is a requirement of any of the professors who've been hired in our program. There are certainly not in our current faculty, but when I first started, there were quite a few other professors, and all would have had some SRV training, maybe not as in depth or as committed as the current staff. So not within the faculty that we have, and not really from anywhere else. Like I said, a little bit from some of our local organizations, but nothing from administration or any other entity.
I'm going to move from the chat for a moment. Judith, I see you have your hand up. You want to unmute yourself and speak to Erica?
I think I'm unmuted. I have, first of all, I should say that for 2 or 3 years, we have had students from Erica's course come to our passing workshops before the pandemic, of course, and some of them did fabulously well. I mean, they were really a joy to have part of the workshop. So I do want to say that. I think that speaks to the wonderful foundation that Erica provides. I'm sort of curious, Erica, whether you have any information about what happens to them afterwards and what they go on to do, and whether any of them go on to further education, whether any of them move into leadership roles. Just if you could speak to that.
So some. The other reality of our program is with our distance and apprenticeship, that means that some of the students are all over Ontario. So I don't necessarily know where everybody ends up, but we have some students who have gone on to university and gotten degrees and moved on to be teachers or administrators of organizations. Many will work in direct services, many locally. We have some who are now in some management positions there. We have one of our students became the school board trustee, which was very handy to have, I think. Yeah, so we hear from some, but certainly I don't know where they all are. But I sort of joke about that's the ultimate plan, is just to put them all out there and see what happens.
And a question from Marion Trent Kratz. She's asking, how do you prepare your students for facing resistance when they leave the program and enter into the field, especially when working in cross-discipline teams and/or in other programs and services?
So I had mentioned that in one of the courses that they take in their last semester, we talk to them about, what they might face. We talk to them about how they can prevent themselves from getting sucked into bad practices, the way we talk about it. But ultimately, I think what we've tried to do in the program is help them remember that this is about the people that they're going to meet and the people that they're going to support, and that ultimately that's what matters. And that's why you deal with the bureaucracies and you deal with the challenge and you deal with the pushback, that you have to remember that people need good staff, and they need good staff even in organizations that you might not be thrilled to work with. And then we also talk to them about, it would be helpful if they had a connection to devalue people outside of their work. And I think that we encourage that, and that probably helps a bit of a safeguard too.
And some questions, Erica. So from Cecile, from Betsy, some questions in terms of the impacts of such a potent course. Any ideas about how and if people stay aware, stay clear over time, if they have like-minded people and mentors within their organizations who sort of continue to walk alongside them in their development as well? Can you speak to that?
So we have some students have created their own, they call it an SRV study group. So there's an SRV study group in Ontario. This is separate from that, where they get together 3 to 4 times a year just to be with like-minded people. Like I said, the reality of the organizations in our area is that there's not a lot of SRV training. There's not a lot of SRV implementation aside from what our students might be doing. So I also strongly encourage them to stay in touch with us, and I have so many students or grads who call me or want to talk to the faculty, come back, have a coffee, and just to connect again with somebody who is on the same page and that kind of thing. But it's really just helping students maintain connection with the program and other grads, because it's not likely that they're going to be well supported in this endeavor, sort of where they're going to work. But I also, because again, we have students all over the province and all over Canada, frankly, encourage them to find the places where there are other, the organizations where SRV is deeply embedded, so that they have that support too.
And Raymond LeMay, great keynote, thank you. Any thoughts about why only 2 Ontario colleges are teaching SRV, and what are the others teaching?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know why. I have all kinds of maybe thoughts or assumptions. The outcomes are really broad, and you can get at those outcomes from a number of angles. And I think a lot of it has to do with who's in the leadership within the program. And when you look across the programs in the province, you have some that are very, very clinical, very medical. We have some that are very sort of behavior focused. They're really all over the place. So Centennial College is the other college that Donald and Peg taught at. So they have a lot of SRV there, but unless there's, I guess, professors or coordinators within the program that have an SRV background, they don't have to teach it. It's not, it's not in any requirement. So I think it needs to be brought in by people who really see that there's some benefit to it.
Bill Foreman, could I ask you to speak your question? I see you have a question there about new issues and controversies. It'd be great to hear some other voices, perhaps. You want to ask your question of Erica?
Yeah, sure, Erica. I know that you've been there at least 10 years, you said, and you've been involved much longer, as I know. We know each other. And I wondered if you have noticed any new controversies or issues that students are dealing with, maybe perhaps derived from the society they're in, or in other patterns of human service or styles and modes and so on, that surface in your teaching of them?
So something that, and I don't think it's just in our area, but it certainly is in our area, that organizations are starting to move outside of just supporting people with disabilities, right? That's what they started to do. But a number of our organizations are now supporting students leaving or children leaving care, supporting people that have interactions with the criminal system, significant mental health issues. And so a lot of organizations are supporting all kinds of people who DSWs are not trained to support. So they're being hired in organizations that might have been a developmental service organization, but certainly has grown into something much bigger. So there's sort of an idea that you can support anybody, like everybody is the same and you can support everybody and it doesn't matter what your training is. But there's a real big push toward agencies supporting all kinds of different people. And I think that's becoming a real situation for lots of our students to be able to manage, because that's not what they're being trained for, but that's what they're expected to do. And then just a completely separate issue, but I think a reality is in all over the place, there's a real shortage right now of service workers. And I think that also means there's all kinds of people being hired that don't have any knowledge or background at all. And that's really tough for students because they feel it's important that, you go through this kind of a program and you learn how to support people well, but then they go to work with others that have nothing. And sometimes nothing can be a good thing too, but it's a bit tough for them to think about. They've invested and they want to do this really well, working alongside people that maybe have a different idea about the work altogether.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Erica, Peg Jenner has asked if you could talk to us a bit about the first hearing impaired person that you encouraged and supported to attend passing.
Sure. So we've had a number of deaf students in our program. We have a school for the deaf in our area, so that's probably why we get more students. And the way that students have attended passing in our program is it's been a bit of a competition. They have to write a paper, and then because there's some funding, some subsidy that the Southern Ontario Training Group provides, so they have to basically compete for that tuition subsidy. And one of our students, Brittany, really wanted to go. She's a deaf student, and we weren't sure exactly how that was going to work because she would need interpreters with her at all times. Very bright young lady, so I had no concern at all about her ability to be able to do it. But the college supported her, sent interpreters that stayed with her the whole time, went to the site visits. And I think, and Judith and Peg were there, they can probably comment, but it worked out well. I think we were all a little nervous about what was going to happen, but it was a great learning opportunity for her. And the college supported her to go, which was really impressive.
And it was a great opportunity. It was a great educational experience for everybody else. It was really nice, and she did fabulously well.
I would agree with that. I floated the team, and I was very worried that what Brittany would get out of the experience. And she was right in there and participating, and everybody figured it out. It was quite amazing, and she was well prepared. So I think Erica did. As you can see, my grandson has just arrived. So I think Erica did a great job in preparing her for the experience as well. So I think there are many lessons we can learn from what Erica did there. Probably that would take us past the time, though.
I would also say that the interpreters loved the experience. And every time I see them in the hall, talk to me about going to passing, because they really were there to support Brittany, but I feel like they felt like they were participating in passing too. So.
All right, Erica, from Valerie Smith, she says, "Well, I'm inspired in that your approach seeks to address directly changing the mindset of the perceiver, in this case, college students and potential human service workers. And I'm curious about field placement sites. What's their knowledge level about SRV? Are they hearing it for the first time? Do they have awareness of it? And how do you go about finding locations to partner with?"
So we partner with the local schools and the developmental service agencies in our city and that surrounding area. They're all very keen to have placement students, not just to help them learn, but frankly, it's helpful to them too to have other help. I would say that there is not much SRV knowledge at all in our local organizations. There's a little bit. We before I came to Loyalist, there was an SRV in a passing in our area. And I've come across a couple of people in agencies that remember that. I think it was almost maybe 15 years ago. But generally, there's generally not much knowledge there other than what maybe our students are bringing to the table. But we also talk to students about how they explain their ideas and what SRV is and how to do that in a way that is, easy to understand and that it's not off-putting. And so there wouldn't be a lot of SRV already within the organizations locally.
Judith, did you have a response to that or something to add?
I wonder if you might offer organizations that provide field placements a spot in a SRV workshop. If any of them would take you up on it.
Yeah. So just you reminded me that we did have some of our local organizations sent people to the employment workshop that we did with Milton Tyree. This was 2 years ago. And so I had sent that flyer out to our advisory committee and we got a few. So there are a few people that have attended a couple of things. But
I might just read two more comments, Erica, from the chat here. So Brenda Jansen said, "Thank you so much for this presentation. I truly wish that other colleges would embrace the teaching of SRV. And I certainly wish I had the opportunity back in the day, as it has impacted me so much since being introduced to it 10 years ago." And then I have to sort of add to that a comment from Jane Barkin, who said, "I once asked teachers from other colleges in Ontario whether they taught SRV, and they all said yes. When I asked for details, they gave 15 minutes to SRV as a theory that was a successor to normalization." So there you go. Lots of work to be done. Yeah. All right. Well, Erica, thank you. That was just a fantastic presentation. Thanks to all of you for your thoughtful questions and responses. Just an excellent way to begin to bring this conference to an end.